Toronto's paranormal hotspot. The Fairmont Royal York Hotel. A Blood Witch Honeymoon Chapter 1. Arrival and first impressions. The Fairmont Royal York Hotel stood tall and imposing against the Toronto skyline, its historic facade a testament to the countless stories it held within. Jessie and Lacy, hand in hand, approached the grand entrance, their eyes wide with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The newlyweds had chosen this iconic hotel for their honeymoon, drawn by its luxurious reputation and the whispered tales of its haunted past. As they stepped into the opulent lobby, the weight of the hotel's history pressed down on them. The chandeliers overhead cast a soft, golden glow, and the intricate patterns on the marble floor seemed to dance with shadows. Lacy squeezed Jessie's hand a little tighter, her emerald eyes darting around, taking in the grandeur. "Can you believe we're actually here?" Jessie whispered, his voice tinged with excitement. Lacy smiled, her red lips curving up in a playful smirk. "It's beautiful, isn't it? And just a tad bit eerie." A bellhop approached them, his uniform pristine and his demeanor professional. "Welcome to the Fairmont Royal York Hotel," he greeted, extending a hand to take their luggage. "I hope you have a pleasant stay." "Thank you," Jessie replied, handing over their bags. "We've booked the honeymoon suite." The bellhop's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before he regained his composure. "Ah, the suite on the 9th floor. A room with quite the reputation." Lacy raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Reputation?" The bellhop hesitated, glancing around as if ensuring no one was within earshot. "Let's just say that particular floor has had its share of unusual occurrences." Jessie chuckled, brushing off the comment. "Old buildings always have their quirks, right?" The bellhop simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course, sir. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your room." As they made their way through the winding corridors, Lacy couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The portraits lining the walls seemed to follow her with their eyes, and the soft murmurs of other guests echoed eerily. She shook off the feeling, reminding herself that it was all in her head. Upon reaching the 9th floor, they were greeted by an old-fashioned elevator with a brass gate. Standing beside it was an elderly man in a faded uniform, his name tag reading, Jimmy Joe. "Evening," he greeted with a warm smile, pulling open the gate for them. "Heading to the honeymoon suite, I presume?" Jessie nodded. "That's right." Jimmy Joe's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Ah, you're in for a treat. That suite has the best view in the entire hotel. And perhaps a few extra guests." Lacy laughed, playing along. "We've heard the stories. But we're not easily spooked." Jimmy Joe winked. "We'll see about that." The elevator ride was short but filled with an odd tension. The soft hum of the machinery was the only sound, and Lacy could feel the weight of the stories associated with this floor. When the elevator doors finally opened, they were met with a long, dimly lit corridor, the end of which was their suite. The room itself was breathtaking. A large four-poster bed dominated the space, draped in luxurious fabrics. A fireplace crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. But it was the view that truly took their breath away. The city of Toronto sprawled out before them, a sea of lights against the night sky. "It's perfect," Lacy whispered, wrapping her arms around Jessie. He kissed her forehead. "It is. Let's make the most of it." As they settled in, the weight of the day's journey began to take its toll. They decided to turn in early, looking forward to the adventures the next day would bring. But as the clock struck midnight, the room grew colder. The soft glow of the city lights outside seemed to dim, and an eerie silence enveloped them. Lacy, half asleep, thought she heard faint whispers, like distant conversations from another time. She snuggled closer to Jessie, seeking comfort in his warmth. But the night was far from over. The tales of the Fairmont Royal York Hotel were about to come alive, and Jessie and Lacy were right at the heart of it. Chapter 2. The elevator's mind of its own. The first rays of dawn filtered through the heavy drapes of the honeymoon suite, casting a soft, golden hue over the room. Lacy stirred, her dreams filled with shadowy figures and whispered conversations. As she slowly came to, the remnants of her dream clung to her, leaving her with an uneasy feeling. She turned to find Jessie already awake, his gaze fixed on the ceiling, deep in thought. "Morning," she murmured, reaching out to touch his arm. He jumped slightly, pulled from his reverie. "Morning," he replied, his voice hoarse. "Did you hear anything last night?" Lacy hesitated, the memories of her dream flooding back. "Just whispers. I thought it was just a dream." Jessie shook his head. "I heard them too. And the elevator. It kept moving up and down all night. Lacy sat up, suddenly alert. Are you sure? Jessie nodded, pointing to the old-fashioned telephone on the bedside table. I called the front desk. They said the elevator was out of order last night. A chill ran down Lacy's spine. She remembered the stories they'd heard about the hotel, the tales of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena. But she'd never imagined they'd experience it firsthand. Determined to shake off the unease, Lacy suggested they head down for breakfast. Let's get out of this room for a bit, she said, pulling on her robe. I could use some fresh air. Jessie agreed, and soon they were making their way down the corridor to the elevator. As they approached, they noticed the doors were slightly ajar, the interior of the elevator bathed in a soft, eerie glow. Lacy hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But Jessie, ever the rational one, reached out to press the button for the ground floor. The door slid shut with a soft hiss, and the elevator began its descent. But instead of stopping at the ground floor, the elevator continued past it, descending further and further into the depths of the hotel. Lacy and Jessie exchanged panicked glances, their hearts racing. Suddenly, the elevator jolted to a stop, the lights flickering ominously. The door slid open to reveal a dimly lit corridor, the walls lined with old portraits, their eyes seeming to follow their every move. Lacy clutched Jessie's arm, her fear palpable. Where are we? Jessie shook his head, equally bewildered. I don't know. But we need to find a way out. They stepped out of the elevator, the doors sliding shut behind them with a finality that sent shivers down their spines. The corridor stretched out before them, the only sound the soft echo of their footsteps. As they made their way down the corridor, they began to notice subtle changes. The portraits on the walls were no longer of familiar faces but of strangers, their expressions twisted in pain and anguish. The air grew colder, the weight of the hotel's history pressing down on them. Suddenly, a soft whisper reached their ears, growing louder and louder until it was a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once. Lacy and Jessie clung to each other, their eyes darting around, trying to find the source of the voices. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the voices stopped, leaving them in deafening silence. Lacy's breath came in short, ragged gasps, her eyes wide with terror. We need to get out of here, she whispered. Jessie nodded, pulling her close. Stay with me, he murmured, his voice filled with determination. They continued down the corridor, their senses on high alert. Every creak, every rustle sent them jumping, their nerves frayed to the breaking point. Finally, they reached the end of the corridor, a large wooden door standing before them. Jessie reached out to turn the handle, but it wouldn't budge. He tried again, putting all his weight behind it, but it remained firmly shut. Lacy's eyes filled with tears, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. We're trapped, she whispered. But Jessie refused to give up. He began to search the room, looking for another way out. And then he saw it, a small, ornate key hanging on the wall. He reached out to grab it, but as he did, the room began to shake, the walls closing in on them. Lacy screamed, her voice filled with terror. Jessie! He turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. Hold on, he shouted, grabbing the key and rushing to the door. He inserted it into the lock, turning it with all his might. The door swung open, revealing the familiar corridor of the hotel. Lacy and Jessie stumbled out, their relief palpable. They made their way back to the elevator, pressing the button for the ground floor. As the doors slid shut, they exchanged a glance, the weight of their ordeal pressing down on them. But as they descended, they couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched, that the hotel had more secrets to reveal. Chapter 3. Discovery of Lacy's legacy. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Fairmont Royal York Hotel's grand dining hall. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting prismatic rainbows across the room. The clinking of silverware and the soft murmur of conversations filled the air. But for Jessie and Lacy, the world had narrowed down to their table, the events of the previous night weighing heavily on their minds. Lacy picked at her food, her appetite lost. Jessie, she began, her voice hesitant, there's something I need to tell you. He looked up, concern evident in his eyes. What is it? She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. Last night, after everything that happened, I found something in our room. An old journal. It belonged to my great-grandmother. Jessie leaned forward, intrigued. What did it say? Lacy hesitated, choosing her words carefully. It spoke of a legacy, a lineage that traces back centuries. My family, it seems, has a history with this hotel. A history that's intertwined with the supernatural. Jessie's eyes widened in surprise. Are you saying? Lacy nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I come from a line of witches. Powerful ones, if the journal is to be believed. Jessie took a moment to process this revelation. But why didn't you tell me before? Lacy looked down, guilt evident in her eyes. I didn't know. My family never spoke of it. I always thought it was just a myth, a story to scare children. But after last night, I can't deny it any longer. Jessie reached across the table, taking her hand in his. We'll figure this out. Together. Lacy smiled, grateful for his support. There's more. The journal speaks of an amulet, a powerful artifact that's hidden within the walls of this hotel. It's said to hold the spirits of those who've passed on, trapping them in a state of limbo. Jessie's eyes darkened with realization. The apparitions, the voices, they're all connected to the amulet. Lacy nodded. And there's one spirit, in particular, that's mentioned repeatedly. A malevolent entity that feeds off the energy of the trapped souls. It's the reason for all the paranormal activity in the hotel. Jessie's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. So, if we find the amulet and release the spirits. Lacy finished his thought. The hauntings will stop. The weight of their task pressed down on them, but they were determined. They would find the amulet and put an end to the hotel's dark history. As they left the dining hall, they were approached by Jimmy Joe, the elderly elevator operator. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation, he began, his voice filled with urgency. I've worked at this hotel for decades, and I've seen things that would make your blood run cold. I want to help. Lacy and Jessie exchanged a glance, realizing they could use all the help they could get. Thank you, Lacy replied, her voice filled with gratitude. We need to find the amulet. Do you know where it might be? Jimmy Joe nodded, his eyes filled with determination. I have an idea. But it won't be easy. The hotel is filled with hidden passages and secret rooms. We'll need to be careful. The trio made their way to the hotel's library, a vast room filled with dusty tomes and ancient manuscripts. Jimmy Joe led them to a section at the back, pulling out a large, leather-bound book. This is the hotel's original blueprint, he explained, flipping through the pages. If the amulet is hidden within these walls, this is our best chance of finding it. They pored over the blueprints, looking for any clue, any hint that might lead them to the amulet. Hours passed, but their determination never wavered. Finally, Lacy's eyes lit up with realization. Look, she exclaimed, pointing to a small, hidden room on the 9th floor. This has to be it. Jessie nodded in agreement. It's right below our suite. It makes sense. Jimmy Joe looked at them, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. We need to be careful. The malevolent spirit won't let us find the amulet without a fight. Lacy took a deep breath, steeling herself for the task ahead. We're ready. And with that, the trio set off, determined to put an end to the hotel's haunted legacy once and for all. Chapter 4. The haunting intensifies. The dim light of the afternoon sun filtered through the heavy drapes of the Fairmont Royal York Hotel, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The 9th floor was silent, save for the soft, rhythmic ticking of an old grandfather clock. Lacy, Jessie, and Jimmy Joe stood at the entrance of their suite, the weight of their task pressing down on them. Lacy took a deep breath, her hand resting on the doorknob. Are we ready? Jessie nodded, determination evident in his eyes. Let's do this. Jimmy Joe, however, hesitated. We need to be careful. The malevolent spirit knows we're here. It'll do everything in its power to stop us. Lacy nodded in agreement. We'll stick together. No matter what. With that, she pushed open the door, revealing the opulent suite beyond. The room was bathed in a soft, golden glow, the remnants of the afternoon sun filtering through the windows. But there was an underlying tension in the air, a palpable sense of unease. The trio made their way to the center of the room, their eyes scanning the walls for any sign of the hidden chamber. Lacy's fingers brushed against the intricate wallpaper, feeling for any inconsistencies. Suddenly, the room grew cold, the temperature dropping rapidly. Their breaths became visible, misty clouds in the frigid air. Lacy's heart raced, her instincts screaming at her that something was wrong. And then, without warning, the lights began to flicker, casting the room in a strobe-like effect. The shadows grew longer, more distorted, taking on a life of their own. Lacy could hear soft, whispered conversations, the voices growing louder and more insistent. Jessie reached out, grabbing her hand. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice filled with urgency. But before they could react, the room was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the soft glow of the city outside. Lacy's heart raced, her senses on high alert. She could feel a presence in the room, something ancient and malevolent. Suddenly, a soft, eerie melody began to play, the notes echoing through the room. Lacy's eyes widened in recognition. It was the same song she'd heard in her dreams, the lullaby her great-grandmother used to sing. The melody grew louder, more insistent, the notes taking on a discordant quality. Lacy could feel the malevolent spirit drawing closer, its presence oppressive and suffocating. Jessie, sensing the danger, reached into his pocket, pulling out a small vial of salt. "Form a circle," he instructed, his voice filled with urgency. Lacy and Jimmy Joe nodded, joining hands to form a protective barrier. Jessie began to sprinkle the salt around them, reciting an ancient incantation under his breath. The malevolent spirit, sensing the threat, let out an ear-piercing scream, the sound echoing through the room. The walls began to shake, the windows rattling in their frames. Lacy could feel the spirit's rage, its fury directed at them. But Jessie continued to chant, his voice growing louder and more powerful. The salt began to glow, casting a soft, protective light around them. The malevolent spirit let out another scream, its form becoming visible, a dark, shadowy figure that seemed to feed off the darkness. Lacy, drawing on her newfound powers, began to chant as well, her voice joining Jessie's in a harmonious melody. The room was filled with a blinding light, the malevolent spirit's form disintegrating before their eyes. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the room was plunged into silence, the only sound the soft, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. Lacy, Jessie, and Jimmy Joe stood in the center of the room, their faces pale and drawn. "We did it," Lacy whispered, her voice filled with relief. Jessie nodded, pulling her close. "But we're not done yet. We still need to find the amulet." Jimmy Joe, his face etched with worry, looked at them. "Be careful. The malevolent spirit may be gone, but there are other dangers lurking in this hotel." Lacy nodded, determination evident in her eyes. "We'll find the amulet and put an end to this once and for all." And with that, the trio set off, their journey far from over. Chapter 5. The amulet's secret chamber. The Fairmont Royal York Hotel, with its grandeur and elegance, held secrets that few dared to uncover. As Lacy, Jessie, and Jimmy Joe ventured deeper into its labyrinthine corridors, the weight of its history pressed down on them. The ornate wallpaper, the plush carpets, and the shimmering chandeliers all bore silent witness to the countless stories that had unfolded within these walls. Guided by the hotel's original blueprints, the trio found themselves standing before a nondescript wooden door at the end of a dimly lit hallway. The door was old, its wood warped and stained, and a heavy iron padlock secured it. "This is it," Lacy whispered, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on the door. The blueprints showed a hidden chamber behind this door. Jessie examined the padlock, noting the ancient symbols etched into its surface. "This isn't just any lock. It's enchanted. We'll need to find the key." Jimmy Joe, his eyes scanning the hallway, pointed to a series of portraits lining the walls. "These are the hotel's original founders. Legend has it that one of them hid the key within their portrait." Lacy approached the first portrait, that of a stern-looking woman with piercing blue eyes. As she touched the frame, a cold breeze swept through the hallway, causing the candles to flicker. The woman's eyes seemed to follow her, a silent challenge in their depths. One by one, they examined each portrait, searching for any sign of the hidden key. As they moved down the hallway, the atmosphere grew heavier, the shadows deeper. Whispers echoed around them, the voices of the past reaching out to them. Finally, Jessie, standing before a portrait of a distinguished gentleman with a sharp beard and a monocle, felt a slight give in the frame. Carefully, he pried it open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay an ornate key, its surface gleaming in the dim light. "This is it," he whispered, holding it up for the others to see. Lacy took the key, her fingers trembling slightly. She approached the locked door, inserting the key into the padlock. It turned smoothly, the lock falling away with a soft thud. With bated breath, they pushed open the door, revealing a small, circular chamber. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with ancient tomes and manuscripts. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it lay the amulet. It was a breathtaking sight. The amulet was made of pure crystal, its surface reflecting the dim light of the chamber. Inside, swirling mists moved, a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. Lacy approached the pedestal, her heart racing. She could feel the power emanating from the amulet, its energy pulsating in the air. As she reached out to touch it, a voice echoed through the chamber. "Who dares to disturb the resting place of the spirits?" The trio spun around, their eyes widening in shock. Before them stood a spectral figure, its form shimmering and translucent. It was the gentleman from the portrait, his eyes filled with anger and accusation. "We mean no harm," Lacy began, her voice trembling. "We seek to free the spirits trapped within the amulet." The spectral figure studied them for a moment, his gaze piercing. "Many have tried and failed. What makes you think you can succeed?" Lacy took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I am a descendant of the witches who once roamed these lands. It is my duty to protect and serve." The spectral figure nodded, his expression softening. "Very well. But be warned, the amulet is protected by powerful enchantments. Only one with a pure heart and a strong will can unlock its secrets." Lacy approached the pedestal, her fingers brushing against the amulet's cool surface. She closed her eyes, focusing her energy, and began to chant. The room was filled with a blinding light, the amulet's energy pulsating and swirling. As the light faded, the amulet lay still, its power released. The spectral figure, now at peace, nodded in gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, his form fading away. Lacy, Jessie, and Jimmy Joe stood in the chamber, the weight of their accomplishment pressing down on them. They had freed the spirits, breaking the curse that had plagued the hotel for centuries. As they made their way back to their suite, the hotel seemed brighter, its energy lighter. The shadows had retreated, and the whispers of the past had been silenced. But their journey was far from over. The amulet, with its untapped power, held secrets that were yet to be uncovered. Chapter 6. The Blood Witch's legacy. The night had fallen over Toronto, and the Fairmont Royal York Hotel stood tall and majestic against the city's skyline. Inside, the grand ballroom was alive with the sound of laughter and music, as guests danced and mingled, oblivious to the events that had transpired just hours earlier. In their suite, Lacy, Jessie, and Jimmy Joe gathered around the amulet, its crystal surface gleaming in the dim light. The room was filled with a palpable tension, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. Lacy, her fingers tracing the amulet's intricate carvings, broke the silence. "This amulet holds more power than we could have ever imagined. We need to understand its true potential." Jessie nodded in agreement. "We've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover." Jimmy Joe, his eyes filled with a mix of awe and fear, looked at them. "Be careful. The amulet may have been dormant for centuries, but its power is ancient and unpredictable." Lacy took a deep breath, her determination evident. "I need to connect with my ancestors, the blood witches who once roamed these lands. They hold the key to unlocking the amulet's secrets." With that, she began to prepare for the ritual. She lit candles, their flames casting a soft, golden glow over the room. She arranged crystals in a circle, their energy pulsating in the air. And in the center, she placed the amulet, its power waiting to be unleashed. Lacy sat cross-legged, her eyes closed, her breathing steady. She began to chant, her voice echoing through the room. The air grew heavy, the energy building to a crescendo. Suddenly, the room was plunged into darkness, the candles snuffed out. A cold wind swept through the room, causing the curtains to billow. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the room was bathed in a soft, ethereal light. Before them stood three spectral figures, their forms shimmering and translucent. They were the blood witches, their eyes filled with wisdom and knowledge. Lacy, her heart racing, approached them. "I seek your guidance," she began, her voice filled with reverence. "I need to understand the amulet's true potential." The eldest of the witches, her hair a cascade of silver, stepped forward. "The amulet holds the power of the elements, the energy of the earth, air, fire, and water. But it also holds a darker power, one that can consume and destroy." Lacy nodded, her determination unwavering. "I understand the risks. But I need to harness its power to protect and serve." The witches exchanged a glance, their expressions inscrutable. "Very well," the eldest replied. "But be warned, the path you've chosen is fraught with danger. You'll need to rely on your strength and your allies." Lacy looked at Jessie and Jimmy Joe, gratitude evident in her eyes. "I'm ready." With that, The witches began to chant, their voices joining Lacy's in a harmonious melody. The room was filled with a blinding light, the amulet's energy pulsating and swirling. As the light faded, the amulet lay still, its power harnessed and controlled. The witches, their task complete, nodded in approval. "You've done well," the eldest whispered, her form fading away. Lacy, Jessie, and Jimmy Joe stood in the room, the weight of their accomplishment pressing down on them. They had harnessed the amulet's power, unlocking its secrets. But their journey was far from over. The amulet, with its untapped potential, held challenges that were yet to be faced. Chapter 7. The Malevolence Return. The Fairmont Royal York Hotel, with its towering spires and ornate architecture, was a beacon in the heart of Toronto. But within its walls, a battle of ancient powers was unfolding. Lacy, having connected with her ancestral blood witches and harnessed the amulet's elemental powers, felt a newfound confidence. But with great power came great responsibility, and the malevolent spirit that once haunted the hotel's corridors was not easily vanquished. As night descended, an oppressive atmosphere settled over their suite. The air grew cold, and an eerie silence enveloped them. Lacy, sensing the impending danger, turned to Jessie. "He's coming." Jessie, his face pale, nodded. "We need to be ready." Jimmy Joe, ever the voice of reason, chimed in. "We faced him before, and we can do it again." Together, the room's lights began to flicker, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A low, guttural growl echoed through the suite, sending shivers down their spines. The malevolent spirit, having regained its strength, was back with a vengeance. Suddenly, the room's temperature plummeted, their breaths visible in the frigid air. The windows rattled violently, and the walls seemed to close in on them. From the shadows, ghostly apparitions emerged, their faces twisted in agony. Lacy, drawing on the amulet's power, began to chant, her voice steady and powerful. The room was filled with a blinding light, the amulet's energy pulsating and swirling. The apparitions, caught in the light, let out ear-piercing screams, their forms disintegrating before their eyes. But the malevolent spirit was not so easily defeated. Its form, dark and shadowy, loomed large, its eyes glowing with malice. "You cannot defeat me," it hissed, its voice dripping with venom. Lacy, her determination unwavering, stepped forward. "We will not let you harm anyone else." The spirit let out a mocking laugh. "You think you can stop me? I've existed for centuries, feeding off the fear and despair of those who've dared to cross my path." Jessie, his courage bolstered by Lacy's resolve, joined her. "We're not afraid of you." The spirit's eyes narrowed, its anger palpable. "You will be." With a deafening roar, it lunged at them, its form shifting and changing, becoming more terrifying with each passing second. The room was plunged into chaos, the very walls shaking with the force of the spirit's rage. Lacy, drawing on the amulet's elemental powers, summoned a wall of fire, blocking the spirit's path. Jessie, using his knowledge of ancient rituals, began to recite an incantation, his voice echoing through the room. The spirit, caught between the fire and the incantation, let out a scream of frustration. Its form began to waver, the shadows that made up its being starting to disintegrate. Jimmy Joe, seeing an opportunity, joined in, his voice joining Jessie's in the chant. The room was filled with a cacophony of sounds, the spirit's screams mingling with their voices. And then, with a final, ear-piercing scream, the spirit was gone, vanquished once and for all. The room, once filled with chaos and destruction, was now bathed in a soft, golden light. Lacy, Jessie, and Jimmy Joe, exhausted but triumphant, looked at each other, their bond stronger than ever. "We did it," Lacy whispered, her voice filled with relief. Jessie, pulling her into a tight embrace, nodded. Together. Jimmy Joe, his eyes filled with tears, looked at them. "Thank you. For everything." As dawn broke, the Fairmont Royal York Hotel stood tall and proud, its dark history finally put to rest. Lacy, Jessie, and Jimmy Joe, having faced unimaginable dangers, emerged victorious, their love and friendship unbreakable. But their journey was far from over. The amulet, with its untapped potential, held secrets that were yet to be uncovered. And they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 8. Whispers from the depths. The morning sun streamed through the opulent windows of the Fairmont Royal York Hotel, casting a golden hue over the lavish suite. Lacy, Jessie, and Jimmy Joe, having faced the malevolent spirit and emerged victorious, felt a brief moment of respite. But the amulet, with its swirling mists and untapped powers, beckoned them with its mysteries. Lacy, her fingers tracing the amulet's cool surface, felt a pull, a connection that was impossible to ignore. "There's more to this amulet than we know," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Jesse, his eyes filled with concern, nodded. "We need to be careful. The malevolent spirit may be gone, but the amulet's power is unpredictable." Jimmy Joe, ever the voice of reason, chimed in, "We've come this far. We can't stop now." Lacy, her determination unwavering, looked at them. "I need to connect with the amulet to understand its true potential." With that, she began to prepare for the ritual. She lit candles, their flames casting a soft, ethereal glow over the room. She arranged crystals in a circle, their energy pulsating in the air. And in the center, she placed the amulet, its power waiting to be unleashed. Lacy sat cross-legged, her eyes closed, her breathing steady. She began to chant, her voice echoing through the room. The air grew heavy, the energy building to a crescendo. Suddenly, the room was plunged into darkness, the candles snuffed out. A cold wind swept through the room, causing the curtains to billow. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the room was bathed in a soft, ethereal light. Before Lacy stood a spectral figure, its form shimmering and translucent. It was a woman, her features regal and commanding, her eyes filled with wisdom and knowledge. Lacy, her heart racing, approached her. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice filled with reverence. The spectral figure smiled, her expression kind. "I am the guardian of the amulet, its protector for centuries." Lacy, her eyes filled with tears, looked at her. "I seek your guidance. I need to understand the amulet's true potential." The guardian nodded, her gaze piercing. "The amulet holds the power of the elements, the energy of the earth, air, fire, and water. But it also holds a darker power, one that can consume and destroy." Lacy, her determination unwavering, nodded. "I understand the risks. But I need to harness its power to protect and serve." The guardian, her expression softening, looked at her. "Very well. But be warned, the path you've chosen is fraught with danger. You'll need to rely on your strength and your allies." With that, the guardian began to chant, her voice joining Lacy's in a harmonious melody. The room was filled with a blinding light, the amulet's energy pulsating and swirling. As the light faded, the amulet lay still, its power harnessed and controlled. The guardian, her task complete, nodded in approval. "You've done well," she whispered, her form fading away. Lacy, Jesse, and Jimmy Joe, their faces pale and drawn, looked at each other, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. They had harnessed the amulet's power, unlocking its secrets. But their journey was far from over. The amulet, with its untapped potential, held challenges that were yet to be faced. And as they ventured deeper into the hotel's labyrinthine corridors, they could hear soft, whispered conversations, the voices of the past reaching out to them. Chapter 9. The labyrinth below the Fairmont Royal York Hotel, with its grandeur and elegance, was a testament to the architectural marvels of its time. But beneath its polished floors and ornate ceilings lay a maze of forgotten tunnels and chambers, remnants of a time long past. Lacy, having harnessed the power of the amulet and connected with its guardian, felt an inexplicable pull towards these hidden depths. The amulet, now glowing with a soft, ethereal light, seemed to be guiding her, its energy resonating with the ancient energies of the hotel. Jesse, ever the protector, looked at her with concern. "Are you sure about this? We don't know what lies below." Lacy, her eyes filled with determination, nodded. "The amulet is guiding me. I have to follow its call." Jimmy Joe, his face pale but resolute, chimed in, "We're with you, every step of the way." With that, the trio made their way to the hotel's basement, the air growing colder with each step. The polished floors gave way to rough-hewn stone, and the ornate ceilings to dark, vaulted arches. As they ventured deeper, they came across a heavy wooden door, its surface covered in ancient runes. Lacy, recognizing the symbols from her ancestral teachings, began to recite an incantation. The door, responding to her call, slowly creaked open, revealing a vast, underground chamber. The chamber was unlike anything they had ever seen. Towering statues lined the walls, their faces contorted in expressions of agony and despair. In the center stood a massive stone altar, its surface stained with the passage of time. But what caught their attention was the labyrinth that lay beyond. A maze of twisting corridors and dead ends, it seemed to stretch on forever, its depths shrouded in darkness. Lacy, feeling the amulet's pull, began to navigate the labyrinth, Jesse and Jimmy Joe close behind. With each turn, they could feel the weight of the hotel's history pressing down on them, the whispers of the past echoing in their ears. As they ventured deeper, they began to encounter ghostly apparitions, their forms shimmering and translucent. These were the lost souls of the hotel, trapped in the labyrinth for eternity. Lacy, drawing on the amulet's power, reached out to them, her voice filled with compassion. "We're here to help. Tell us your stories." One by one, the apparitions began to speak, their voices filled with pain and sorrow. They spoke of betrayal and heartbreak, of dreams shattered and hopes dashed. They spoke of a malevolent force that had trapped them in the labyrinth, feeding off their despair. Lacy, her heart heavy with the weight of their stories, looked at Jessie and Jimmy Joe. "We have to free them." With that, she began to chant, her voice echoing through the labyrinth. The amulet, responding to her call, began to glow brighter, its energy pulsating and swirling. As the chant reached its crescendo, the labyrinth began to shift and change, its walls moving and rearranging. The apparitions, caught in the amulet's light, began to fade, their forms disintegrating before their eyes. And then, with a final, ear-piercing scream, the malevolent force was vanquished, its hold on the hotel broken. Lacy, Jessie, and Jimmy Joe, exhausted but triumphant, made their way back to the surface, the weight of their accomplishment pressing down on them. They had faced the darkest depths of the hotel and emerged victorious. But their journey was far from over. The amulet, with its untapped potential, held secrets that were yet to be uncovered. And as they ventured deeper into the hotel's history, they would uncover truths that would change their lives forever. Chapter 10. The bloodlines. Burton. The sun had set, casting the Fairmont Royal York Hotel in a cloak of shadows. The grand chandeliers that once sparkled with life now flickered intermittently, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The trio, having faced the labyrinth and its trapped souls, now found themselves in the hotel's grand library, surrounded by dusty tomes and ancient manuscripts. Lacy, her fingers tracing the spines of the books, felt a sense of urgency. The amulet, now pulsating with a soft, rhythmic glow, seemed restless, as if it was trying to communicate something vital. Jessie, sensing her unease, approached her. "What is it?" Lacy, her eyes distant, replied, "The amulet. It's trying to tell me something. There's a story here, a story that's been buried for centuries." Jimmy Joe, ever the skeptic, raised an eyebrow. "A story? What kind of story?" Lacy, her gaze fixed on a particular book, replied, "Our story." With trembling hands, she pulled the book from the shelf. Its cover, worn and faded, bore the emblem of her ancestral blood witches. She began to read, her voice filled with emotion. The story spoke of a powerful bloodline, a lineage of witches who had once roamed the lands, their powers unmatched. They were the protectors of the amulet, its guardians for generations. But with great power came great responsibility, and over time, the bloodline was hunted, persecuted, and nearly extinguished. Lacy, tears streaming down her face, looked at Jessie and Jimmy Joe. "This is my legacy, our legacy. We are the last of the bloodline, the last hope for the amulet." Jessie, his face pale, whispered, "What does this mean?" Lacy, her voice filled with determination, replied, "It means we have a responsibility, a duty to protect the amulet and its power. But it also means we're in danger. There are forces out there, forces that will stop at nothing to get their hands on the amulet." Jimmy Joe, his eyes filled with fear, looked at them. "What do we do?" Lacy, her gaze fixed on the horizon, replied, "We prepare. We train. We harness the amulet's power and use it to protect ourselves and the world." The trio, their resolve strengthened, began their training. Under Lacy's guidance, they learned to harness the amulet's elemental powers, to control its energy and use it to their advantage. They practiced spells and incantations, their voices echoing through the hotel's grand halls. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, they began to sense a growing darkness, a malevolent force that was drawing closer with each passing day. One fateful night, as they sat in the library, a sudden chill filled the air. The candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. From the shadows, a figure emerged, its form dark and shadowy, its eyes glowing with malice. Lacy, recognizing the malevolent spirit they had once vanquished, stepped forward, the amulet glowing brightly in her hand. "You cannot defeat us," she hissed, her voice filled with defiance. The spirit, its form shifting and changing, let out a mocking laugh. "You may have defeated me once, but I am eternal. I will not be vanquished so easily." With that, it lunged at them, its form a swirling mass of darkness and despair. The trio, drawing on the amulet's power, fought back, their spells and incantations echoing through the room. The battle raged on, the very walls of the hotel shaking with the force of their clash. But as dawn broke, the spirit, weakened and defeated, was once again vanquished, its hold on the hotel broken. Lacy, Jessie, and Jimmy Joe, exhausted but triumphant, looked at each other, their bond stronger than ever. They had faced unimaginable dangers and emerged victorious. But their journey was far from over. The amulet, with its untapped potential, held secrets that were yet to be uncovered. And as they ventured deeper into the hotel's history, they would uncover truths that would change their lives forever. Chapter 11. The blessing and release. The Fairmont Royal York Hotel, with its grand ballrooms and opulent suites, had seen countless celebrations over the years. But tonight, it would bear witness to a ritual unlike any other. Lacy, her ancestral lineage of blood witches now fully awakened within her, stood at the center of the grand ballroom. The amulet, pulsating with a soft, ethereal glow, lay before her on an ancient altar. Surrounding her were Jessie and Jimmy Joe, their faces etched with a mix of determination and apprehension. The room was dimly lit, the only light emanating from a circle of candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with anticipation, the very atmosphere charged with energy. Lacy, her voice steady and clear, began the incantation. "Spirits of the past, guardians of this sacred place, hear my call. We seek your blessing, your guidance, as we embark on this journey." The room grew colder, a tangible presence making itself known. From the shadows, spectral figures began to emerge, their forms shimmering and translucent. These were the spirits of the hotel, those who had once walked its halls and now remained, trapped in an eternal limbo. Jessie, his hand instinctively reaching for Lacy's, whispered, "Are you sure about this?" Lacy, her gaze fixed on the spirits, nodded. "It's the only way. We need to release them, to set them free." Jimmy Joe, ever the voice of reason, added, "And we need their blessing. Their energy will strengthen the amulet, protect us from the malevolent forces that seek to harm us." Lacy, drawing on the amulet's power, reached out to the spirits, her voice filled with compassion. "We seek your blessing, your guidance. Help us harness the amulet's power, protect us from the darkness that threatens to consume us." The spirits, their forms now more defined, began to circle the trio, their energy merging with the amulet's. The room was filled with a blinding light, the very air vibrating with power. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, the spirits disappearing into the ether. The room, once filled with energy and anticipation, was now bathed in a soft, golden glow. Lacy, her face pale but resolute, looked at Jessie and Jimmy Joe. "It's done. We have their blessing." Jessie, pulling her into a tight embrace, whispered, "We did it." Jimmy Joe, his eyes filled with tears, added, "Together." But their celebration was short-lived. From the shadows, a malevolent force began to emerge, its form dark and shadowy, its eyes glowing with malice. The spirit they had once vanquished was back, and it was not alone. Lacy, drawing on the amulet's newly acquired power, stepped forward, her voice filled with defiance. "You cannot defeat us. We have the spirit's blessing, their protection." The spirit, its form shifting and changing, let out a mocking laugh. "You may have their blessing, but you cannot defeat me. I am eternal." With that, it lunged at them, its form a swirling mass of darkness and despair. The trio, drawing on the amulet's power, fought back, their spells and incantations echoing through the room. The battle raged on, the very walls of the hotel shaking with the force of their clash. But as dawn broke, the spirit, weakened and defeated, was once again vanquished, its hold on the hotel broken. Lacy, Jessie, and Jimmy Joe, exhausted but triumphant, looked at each other, their bond stronger than ever. They had faced unimaginable dangers and emerged victorious. But their journey was far from over. The amulet, with its untapped potential, held secrets that were yet to be uncovered. And as they ventured deeper into the hotel's history, they would uncover truths that would change their lives forever. Chapter 12. Departure and reflection. The first rays of dawn painted the Toronto skyline in hues of gold and crimson. The Fairmont Royal York Hotel, an emblem of luxury and history, stood tall against the backdrop, its windows reflecting the morning light. Inside, the grand ballroom, which had witnessed a fierce battle just hours before, was now bathed in a serene glow. Lacy stood by the window, the amulet resting securely around her neck. Its once vibrant glow had subdued, but the power it held was palpable. Jessie approached her, wrapping an arm around her waist, his face etched with the weariness of the night's events. "We did it," he whispered, pressing a gentle kiss on her temple. Lacy nodded, her gaze distant. "We did. But at what cost?" The weight of their actions, the realization of the spirits they had released, and the malevolent force they had vanquished weighed heavily on them. The hotel, with its grandeur and opulence, held stories of love, betrayal, dreams, and despair. And they had become a part of its tapestry. Jimmy Joe, having packed their belongings, joined them. "It's time," he said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and sadness. The trio made their way to the hotel's grand entrance, the staff nodding in acknowledgement. They had become legends in their own right, their story whispered in hushed tones. As they stepped outside, the city, with its bustling streets and towering skyscrapers, greeted them. But amidst the chaos, there was a sense of peace, a feeling that they had made a difference. They hailed a cab, the driver nodding in recognition. "The heroes of the Fairmont Royal York," he said with a grin. Lacy smiled, the weight of their actions slowly lifting. "Just doing our part," she replied. The drive to the airport was filled with reflections. The city, with its mix of old-world charm and modernity, had become a part of them. And as they boarded their flight, they knew they were leaving a piece of themselves behind. The flight was uneventful, the trio lost in their thoughts. Lacy, her fingers tracing the amulet's cool surface, felt a sense of completion. They had faced unimaginable dangers, tapped into ancient powers, and emerged victorious. But the journey had also brought them closer, forging bonds that would last a lifetime. Jessie, sensing her thoughts, squeezed her hand. "We did it together," he whispered. Lacy nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Together." Jimmy Joe, ever the voice of reason, chimed in, "And we'll face whatever comes next, together." The plane touched down, signaling the end of their journey. But as they stepped outside, the world, with its endless possibilities, beckoned. They had faced the ghosts of the past, and in doing so, had found their purpose. And as they ventured forth, they knew they were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. We hope you have enjoyed our introduction to Toronto's Fairmont Royal York Hotel Poltergeist Hell, as paranormal scary story. Please visit us at Paranormal Untold Stories. .com to listen to more of our scary stories collection. Paranormal Untold Stories encourages you to contact us if you have your own untold story that you would like our professionals team to put online as a scary story. Thank you. Please follow our YouTube channel, Paranormal Untold Stories, and encourage others to do the same. Paranormal Untold Stories.